I think the United States came to realize, unfortunately only after much bloodshed and tragedy and the horrific experience of ethnic cleansing, that if we were serious about our commitments to human rights, and if we took seriously the concept that has since come to be embraced of responsibility to protect, we could not just stand on the sidelines and watch people being slaughtered because of their ethnicity, religion, or some other aspect of their identity. At the same time, I think the experience of the former Yugoslavia has impressed upon international policymakers, not only in the United States, but in the United Nations, Western Europe, and so on, how fragile political order can be, how difficult the transition from authoritarianism to a more pluralistic, open, and competitive political system can be, and how important it is to get institutional design right, and to think creatively about how to structure institutions and incentives to give different groups security and to create a positive sum rather than a zero-sum dynamic. The tragedy of civil war and crimes against humanity that are taking place in Syria today as we sit here is unfortunate evidence that we have not fully internalized the lessons of the former Yugoslavia, and that there is a threshold beyond which the international community tends to become exhausted, both psychologically from their commitments and in terms of available resources that they are willing to deploy, be they diplomatic resources, military resources, financial or otherwise. Obviously, it's a somewhat different situation. Every situation is distinctive and unique, but to say that the international community has so far failed in its responsibility to protect in Syria, I think would be a very serious understatement. On the other hand, of course, Syria is very, very complicated. The West, the United States, Western Europe, other actors are right to worry about who the alternatives would be to the Assad regime in Syria if it were to completely collapse. But to just stand on the sidelines or negotiate through persuasion and imploring when 100 to 200 people are being killed a day, often in the most intentionally brutal ways, is not acceptable. I'm not sure. I think there may have been a mix of motives and a certain amount of wishful hoping or thinking, a certain amount of feeling that he's someone who could be worked with and nurtured along, and certainly the least we can say is a very serious underestimation of the cynicism and criminal behavior that he was capable of on many fronts, literally in terms of misuse of power and resources, but also in terms of tolerating, orchestrating, mobilizing what we would now call crimes against humanity. I think he was misjudged in ways that were naive, but I also think he was underestimated. And maybe the gravity of the danger in the former Yugoslavia was also underestimated when it was in the process of breaking away and breaking up from its former self. Well, I think it's very disturbing that Serbia has elected a president who is in one way or another morally, if not legally, implicated in the crimes of the not so distant past, and who is minimizing the gravity of the crimes that were committed in Srebrenica and elsewhere in the former Yugoslavia. This is very deeply disturbing, both as an indication of how far Serbia has come or not come in coming to grips with and accounting for the crimes of the past, the injustices that were done. And also, I think, you know, we can't completely dismiss the possibility that such violence could erupt again at some point. Obviously, the context now is much less permissive. Serbia would have much more to lose. But when justice is not done and accountability is not established for crimes of that scope, it lowers the threshold of permissibility for this kind of criminality to be organized again at some point in the future. You know, the West had a saying, I'd say civilization had a saying, after the Nazi genocide in World War II, never again. And I will never forget the refrain, the angry refrain of our former Secretary of State and colleague here at the Hoover Institution, George Shultz, when the massacres in the former Yugoslavia were going on, early on in the prosecution of them. What does never again mean if the West is going to stand by in Mostar and Srebrenica and let this kind of killing take place indiscriminately and without any penalty or injunction against what's happening? So I'd say if you don't establish accountability and don't draw clear red lines around this kind of behavior, it certainly raises the possibilities of it happening again.